that. So, well, good to see you.
Likewise, Howard. Good seeing you. Hope you're staying safe and staying home and keeping healthy through all this unprecedented time. So yeah, it's budget season. So obviously this COVID-19 crisis has really impacted a lot of things across the country. Our governor has been pretty transparent in saying that he can't protect schools from the impact in terms of the financial crisis, and he's talking about a statewide about a $10 to $15 billion impact. And he warns that obviously school aid cuts are obviously on the forefront, and he's been very transparent. So to his credit, at least he's been honest and upfront about it, although we think it's unfair because we've been feeding kids and feeding the community and still providing remote learning, obviously not in the traditional sense, but we're still operating. We're not 100% shut down. And so we're still doing the best we can, given the situation. But yeah, we also got our state aid runs, and they're flat. I mean, from year to year. Same amount of funding that we got from the state in 2019-20, we are getting again in 2021. And if you know simple math, the cost of our employees, healthcare benefits, salaries, contractual obligations are going to increase. And it's going to put a little bit of a burden on us as a district to figure out what that gap is going to be and how we address it. And I'll be honest, as a superintendent, I know I'm 90 days into the district, but I do not feel that it'd be responsible for us to ask the taxpayers to take up some of that burden, given the fact that many of them have lost their jobs. And, we know the city has also raised taxes already this past year, or had voted to. And so for us as a school district to also ask our community to say, hey, we know you're dealing with a unprecedented national crisis, losing your jobs. Many of you are out of business, may not recover, have been home with your own kids doing teaching and learning. And oh, by the way, we want you to raise your taxes so you can cover our gap. Or I just think that would be irresponsible. So we've got some work to do as a district. We'll be meeting with the board and sharing some recommendations. And obviously, at the end of the day, the board will make that initial decision, and then we'll put it out for a public vote.
Are there recommendations now as far as cuts, or it sounds like you're not planning? You're going to try to avoid any kind of or much of a tax increase, if any. You looking at cutting? What's the plan there?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple options. I'll be honest. We had I did a virtual town hall with our staff yesterday. All bargaining units, all members. I shared the gap is about 1.9 million. Is the difference between year to year and aid and to our obligations, obviously with contracts and our materials, our supports, our transportation costs. Looking at everything we currently do now, if we were to carry it over next year, it'd be about a 1.9 million. That's every employee who's currently permanent, maintaining them and maintaining our services, maintaining our class sizes, our ratio. So it's about 1.9 million. And so right now, what we're doing is, as a superintendent, I'm putting together a list of recommendations. Right now, it would potentially mean some layoffs, maybe not replacing some positions of people who retire or who leave, but also looking at things like, what do we need to continue to offer? Again, it's a set amount of money. And so when we met, and again, probably first time it's ever been done, at least that I'm aware of, we did a virtual town hall with all the teachers, clerical, custodial, and just shared the options. And we did ask for them if they would be willing to consider as a pay freeze option. I know it's pretty unheard of, and most times it rarely ever happens in any district that all units agree to it, so that we could protect everybody. We're entering some unknown economic times. We don't know how the market's going to bounce back. We don't know what the economy is going to look like. But I think if we can guarantee that people can stay at least employed, still keep working with their kids, doing the work that they love, regardless of seniority, from our least senior teacher to our most senior teacher, we can protect everyone and still provide that, Batavia Blue Devil experience. I think that's important. But obviously, I can't make that decision. That'd be the decision of bargaining units. And, we've proposed also some things about maybe changing our work day a little bit to accommodate reduced transportation costs, to allow us to transport all kids in the district and also save us about $200,000. But again, in the contract, that's a decision teachers need to make in conjunction with us, not just me as a superintendent saying this is what we're going to do. So we're trying to be real collaborative, Howard, trying to be real transparent. But, it's a give and take when you're dealing with collective bargaining and making sure that folks, they have every right to say no to these things because they've negotiated pay raises and things of that nature, which I understand. But to me, as a superintendent, I want to try to protect everybody I can within reason. And this would only be for a year because the governor is proposing 4 additional windows that he would make what he's calling these measurement periods, where he's going to come in and adjust our budgets. So the first one is at the end of the month. So we'll actually be impacted this year potentially, and know by May 1st what the first impact is. Then the second one is by the end of June 30th, there'll be another impact. And then he's proposed July 1 to December 31st of 2020 and January 1st to March 31st of 2021. So this is kind of like, I don't know if you ever remember the gap elimination adjustment, the GEA, that really impacted a lot of districts about 10 years ago. Well, we're kind of heading back, I think, a little bit with that time, unless we get some federal aid, some kind of federal stimulus money to protect schools, just, again, because our state aid was flat. And, given the fact that we know unemployments are at an all-time high right now, the number of people filing for them, and again, I just don't think it would be a good, responsible act to ask the taxpayers to say, hey, we want to raise your taxes X amount of dollars to help, close this gap. And you're a taxpayer, Howard, right?
Yeah, I can relate. So it sounds like you're needing the cooperation of the labor leaders and labor unions. Have you had any conversations so far? Are you getting a good vibe, or where are you at on that?
Well, I think we just had our first conversation. Yesterday was just kind of like I did a virtual town hall, kind of just went through the scenario, gave the numbers, explained the options of what a pay freeze would do. What would that do cost-wise? It would almost nearly eliminate the gap till about 400,000, and that's something that we could definitely look through, looking at some efficiencies, some contracts, looking at some of our services that we got. Not replacing some retirees would help adjust that 400,000 easily. And then again, it'd be kind of keeping everyone together, keeping everyone's health coverage, keeping everyone employed. And for me, the ultimate goal is that kids wouldn't see a difference in their experience at Batavia. And that's the one thing that we're trying to protect here, is the experience of students, so that they can still, have the same art and music and electives and sports and things that, drive kids to school. Are the electives, are the the social interactions with not only their peers, but also being on a team, playing in sports, being on a musician, being in the band. We want to protect all that we can. And again, I get it. It's tough. I've been on the other side as a former principal about collective bargaining, and you don't want to give up your pay raises that you've negotiated. I get it. But, we've been trying to really emphasize a theme here, that we're a family, and that, we're better together. And, we're just trying to make sure that folks realize that we can fix this gap. It will require a little bit of a compromise, or we don't. And then we will have to think about layoffs and, some of our least senior staff being let go, and maybe increasing class size here and there. We've had the fortunate pleasure of having some really low class sizes in some of our courses of like 20 kids, 19, 18. So we may have to go to 25. We may have to go to things like that, where we have to reduce the number of teachers, because we have to have larger sections to accommodate that. And so I don't want to do any of that, but that's you get hired as a superintendent to make some tough decisions and recommendations. But I'll have to do it if we can't get, folks to kind of see past the individual, raise for the year. But again, and I also, just to be clear, Howard, I also said to the groups that the pay freeze would start with me too. So I would be willing to not go to the board and ask for a freeze of my salary currently to get us through the next year. Every employee down would be the expectation. Because if we don't all do it, what I don't want to do is have anybody pitted against each other, or, the teachers did it, but the administrators didn't do it, and the custodial did it. That's not what we're trying to do here. And I get it. Listen, they all negotiated in good faith an agreement. And the board, definitely has been extremely supportive of that agreement. But, I think the one thing for me is that we're in unprecedented times. If this was a normal budget season and people weren't laid off and the community wasn't impacted and the governor wasn't saying $10 to $15 billion, then, we'd go through a regular traditional process. But because we don't know what's going to happen, and he's clearly said that there's going to be adjustments, I think we have to be a little bit, proactive and creative and try to get ahead of this. And I can't guarantee after 1 year, but at least I can guarantee for a year, if you're currently a Batavia employee, that we can protect you, and then we can see how things go moving into 2021.
You mentioned, I think earlier, one of the goals is to protect the student experience. So, but do you anticipate any kind of cuts to electives, extracurricular, arts, athletics, anything like that?
So I think everything's open at this point. If you can't reduce it, obviously through a pay freeze option, you got to look at everything. And one of the first things we have to do is make sure we graduate kids. That's our priority, is graduating kids with a diploma. And then it's about, so I'll give you an example. Kids aren't required to have maybe 4 years of art and 4 years of math to graduate. it's a great thing to have in the experience. But if we're going to have to find funding, we got to make sure you have, your 4 years of English, your 4 years of social studies, your 3 years of science. Those are the requirements. And so it's a fine line, Howard, but we got to find efficiencies, and I'm looking at every unit at this point in terms of, custodial. What do we need for buildings and grounds? Do we need the personnel we have? Obviously, different groups are different values in terms of average salary and benefits. So, you figure like your teacher aides and your clerical, they're not going to give you the same amount of dollar value as an assistant principal or an administrator, which will be a more expensive employee. And so, at the end of the day, I want to make sure that if we make intentional, smart decisions, that kids can't feel the difference of when they walk in, again, next school year, whenever we get the opportunity to return. And so that's my biggest thing. And again, it's not easy. It's been a long time, I think, since this community's faced a little bit of budget difficulties. But you're going to hear it. Rochester's got a budget deficit. You're hearing all the cities are going to start doing. You're going to start hearing more, I think, in Genesee County region with school districts really because state aid was flat. So every district's going to have some challenges unless they're going to go to their community and ask for a tax cap override and ask for the increase in taxes. And again, I think it's just tough to ask for at this point when people are dealing with this new normal of being home all day and not even able to go to work. And, how am I going to increase my taxes, $100 for every $1,000, whatever my house, I don't know what it would be. We haven't really explored that, but we are exploring that. But again, I think it'd be unfair to tell a homeowner, hey, we're going to raise you $100 for every $1,000 your house is assessed to help, decrease our budget. I mean, I think that would be a tough ask,
Mm-hmm. So shifting gears a little bit, but still talking about funding. Now, I may not be remembering things right, or because it's been a long time since I covered this, but the state aid, or isn't there funding that's tied to like school attendance and days that you're in school? And I'm wondering how that's working out under these.
Yeah, the governor has kind of waived that right now, given the requirements. He's waived all that because of the 180-day school day requirements. And so, yeah, there is some aid attached to attendance, but right now with the crisis, those things have kind of gone out the window. He's got a waiver, an executive order that just basically waives, which is why we have to keep operating. So technically this past week, the April 6th through the 10th would have been our spring break, but we've had to feed families. We've still had our teachers are doing a great job doing remote learning. I mean, we're still kind of operating. So all of those requirements of attendance and aid have kind of gone out the window, and our aid is pretty much flat. And so it is identical, the same numbers we got in 1920. We're getting them again for 2021.
How getting any feedback on how the remote learning's working? Response from students. I've seen some stuff online about maybe first and second graders might be a little hard to control on remote learning. How are things going?
Yeah, I think it depends on the age groups. I think the biggest thing, Howard, that stands out is the inequities around internet access. I mean, it's a conversation I think at some point, hopefully nationally, but even regionally, we need to talk about what that means. Especially some of our communities are very rural. Some of our folks live in areas where you can't just always get internet and affordability. So we got to talk about that. I think that to me has been the biggest thing exposed. I think Batavia is in a pretty unique position. We've been able to give great job by our IT department and our coordinator, our director, Jeff McKinney's done a great job making sure that technology's been available 2 through 12. Kids could take devices home 2 through 12. And I think that is, pretty phenomenal. And we've had a great turnout of parents coming in and picking them up and taking them home. So, but we still had many parents didn't show up because they don't have necessarily internet access, or they may have not been aware that we were doing that because we did it, via robocall or their phone number change. So, I mean, I think to me, the biggest thing that stands out is some of the challenges around internet accessibility. And I think the other challenge is that, we've asked parents to do something they've never really done. We've asked them to kind of help facilitate home learning. And, our teachers are fantastic, but they can't necessarily manage the home environment remotely, right? They can set the expectations, they can put the assignments up. And so, some of our challenges, at least with some of our high school students, is making sure they're logging in the Google Classroom and they're submitting assignments because, at the end of the day, although the New York State waived the Regents requirements, so there's no exams this year, they still need to demonstrate that they're passing the course. We still need to make sure that there's evidence of learning. and that kids are doing, to earn their course credit. And so we're working on some plans internally to try to kind of readjust, reboost. Our high school principals meeting with his counselors to make sure we're going kid by kid, figuring out, where the challenges may be. We are having some great successes. There's some great art projects shared on social media, and then we hear about some other challenges around access and equity, and kids maybe not be as responsive, or they don't have internet connection. It's hard to just do packets. It's things like that.
So hopefully I remember all the questions that I had coming out of that. You triggered a lot of thoughts for me. But one of them is you talked about students not having, the inequality of internet access and tools. What are you doing for, how's that working out for those kids that, how are you bridging that gap, basically?
Yeah, well, with the kids that don't, we've been, again, given hard copies of paperwork and packets and different, many of the materials that are online. We've been producing them, photocopying them, and making them available at our distribution points for food. Or we've had, individuals, administrators, teachers, go to the houses and throw them in the mailboxes for kids so that they have them. There's been a variety of stories that have been at least reported back to me, but, it's really tough. We've shared some of the free resources with like Spectrum, given free internet, I think, for like 60 days when this kind of started out. But then, I don't know where they are with their installation. Some other parents told us that they're at least a couple weeks behind on installation. So there's a variety of things. There's only so much we can do as a school district, but oftentimes we're asked to bridge all the social inequities out there as schools. But, we're doing the best we can. And, I know that, we can look at some options like buying hotspots, but it's something we haven't necessarily pursued yet. Because even in the hotspot world, the companies are having tough times fulfilling orders and things of that nature. And again, there's only so much money to do some of this, and time. And I think the other challenge is that technically we're supposed to come back April 30th. So it's hard to operate knowing that potentially in a couple weeks the governor's saying we're going to return, although he has extended it already a couple times. It would be great to get like more of a long-term plan to say, hey, we're done for the year. And again, I know he's in a tough spot to make a call like that, but it would give us at least a little bit better an opportunity to long-term plan. So we've been doing kind of like 2-week plans, and that's been a little challenging, knowing that so we're doing the best we can, Howard, and I really want to compliment our parents and our teachers who have done a great job trying to make sure their kids stay connected in a way. Our social media has been pretty busy. If you look online, Twitter and Facebook page, kids posting things. We've been trying to recognize our seniors, so we don't want them to lose this experience. I mean, senior year of high school, and then this happens. Your prom, your end of the spring sports seasons, your graduation. It's up in the air right now. What does that look like? And so we want to just keep hope alive during these times.
That's great. You mentioned the seniors. I'll just throw out anything you want to do to recognize seniors. Throw it our way. We'll participate in that and
Absolutely.
Put it out to our thousands of readers. So one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the tech. I was around to cover the rollout of the Chromebooks and everything, and I don't think anybody anticipated that use then. So it's a good thing that was taken care of then. So we're ready now.
Yeah, it was great call by previous leadership, the board, in terms of making that investment and going 1-to-1. It was definitely, it put us at a different spot. All of our kids knew how to interact. All of our high school teachers knew we're pretty much operating in a Google Classroom. It just kind of accelerated like full implementation of that. But again, for us to be in that spot, and oftentimes people will tell you like, oh, that's a bad use, spending money on laptops and kids taking them home. But, our kids, they own it. Like they own the equipment. They take care of it. They know that it's kind of their gateway into school and interactions and emailing their teachers. And so, yeah, definitely something that I'm glad we had in place, because I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have as much technology already available. We'd probably be scrambling and doing packets and, doing school kind of a little bit harder. Now there's at least Zoom conferences and Google Hangouts where kids can get on with teachers and see their peers, and they can have conversations. They can submit lessons. So it's pretty cool, actually. And I think when we're all done with this, I think it may change education a little bit.
Do you have, you mentioned, the new role for parents in this. Do you have kind of recommendations, expectations, advice for parents that are now basically the home tutor and home principal?
Yeah, exactly. I got 4 at home as well, and so I tell you, there's some days that are better than others, and you do the best you can navigating your work responsibilities. Obviously, I have to stay connected and fulfill my job and go into the office making sure we're feeding families and things like that, and then come home and also play school at my own house with my own kids and make sure that they're doing the assignment. So I would just say, if you're a single parent, take some deep breaths, realize do the best you can. It is, a tough environment to be in, to not only still be a parent, but now all of a sudden be a teacher, a disciplinarian, an educator, make sure kids are doing assignments. And then for some of our families, they haven't seen some of the stuff we've been doing with kids, Common Core math, and some of those things that we've rolled out with our curriculum that, we teach math differently now than they may have learned, when they were going to school. And so, my advice is just, do the best you can, communicate with the teacher remotely if you could, but don't get so frustrated, and still focus a little bit on the social emotional well-being of yourself, your own mindset, your kids' mindset. I mean, it's been a huge thing that we just disrupted kids' experience, right? It's one thing if it's a snow day, we're home for a day or two for weather, but now to be home, going 4 weeks into this, heading into our 5th week next week is, no one could have planned for this.
So there are, I didn't really prepare for this question, so I don't have like the studies to reference right in front of me, but I've come across stuff before about, and this is a more philosophical question maybe, but I've come across stuff before about how the role parents play in education and the disparities in achievement over what happens at home. And you mentioned single mothers, and that's an area that's always been tough for education. And I would include them kind of in this question. But for families, do you think that could there be a benefit from this experience, that it reintegrates the family into education, changes the way families interact with education?
I mean, I think, family's always important when it comes to school, right? Home sets the first set of expectations for anybody, right? So as you grow up, as you're raised, your parents kind of set the first benchmark of your expectations, right? Like, so I came from a family that they didn't have a high school diploma. So that was like the benchmark was, you got to go to high school, you got to graduate, then you got to go to college, because that was kind of established. I think, one thing I would be careful is that it's unfair to necessarily put that generalization on parents, just because sometimes they're just dealing with some of the challenges of maybe having 2 jobs because they're trying to feed families and pay rent, and they don't want to get evicted and do those things. And so I think it would be tough to say that the parents have the sole responsibility. If all social indicators are clear and even, then I say yes, parents can definitely dictate that. But I think in some cases, the family unit is extremely important. I hope it's kind of reinvigorated this whole nuclear family concept of taking care of each other and making sure we're there for our kids. But we know that everyone's dealing with a variety of things. Some parent, if you could be in a household and have an alcoholic parent, I mean, being home doesn't fix that, right? And so, we got to be honest and say that the beautiful thing about schools is that we can sometimes bridge that. And so getting kids in front of a group of adults, at Batavia Middle School or Batavia High School or JK or Jackson who help bridge that gap of a constant motivation and push and support and telling them they love the kids. Of course, we want that always to happen at home first, but then again, we can't control that variable. And so I would not be honest if I didn't say that, parents do matter, but we got to be honest and say sometimes our parents are dealing with things that are bigger than what's in front of them. And I can't tell a parent that ever just purposely said, I don't care about my kid, I don't want them to do well. It's oftentimes other things that get in their way for being there for their kids. And so, again, we just don't know what challenges that they're facing. And, I'm always of the mindset of we don't know the battles that anybody's facing when we're not around. So
what, little tougher question, what's your biggest concern right now? What maybe like keeps you up at night, and what's your thoughts about how to bridge that?
I think, obviously I think my biggest concern is, what does it look like when we come back? What does school look like? What does this experience look like? When will we come back? I mean, I think about that all the time. I'm a forward thinker. I try to plan. I think in the immediate is the budget. I think we have some deadlines that are going to come up around the budget. I want to make sure that we do that well. I want to try to protect as much of our staff as possible and be responsible about that. But I'm also concerned, when will we open? When will we give them this green light to come back? Because I think that then sets the precedent of like, all right, great, we're going to plan for 2021 school year. Like, so if we knew that we were not coming back this year, it changes the whole mindset of what we're doing with kids and how we're finishing off the year. So it's been tough. It's one of those things where, like, it's just you try your best to say, like, I know what tomorrow looks like. I know what tomorrow looks like. But when you get close to these deadlines, I'm counting already down to April 29th. Are we going to get another extension? Because if we are, now I got to plan for another 2 weeks, and it just changes things. And it just changes everything we're doing now, from the way we operate, with board meetings having to be closed now, and having any of my meetings be virtually, and not really getting together with folks has just changed a lot of things. And I think the number one concern for all of us, and starting with me and the board and our teachers, our principals, is our kids. Like, what are they doing with their time home 24 hours a day? Is it all productive? What are the gaps that are going to come out of this from learning, and what are the trauma that's going to come out of this from, like, even meal access? I mean, Howard, we had given 3 weeks in, we've given 30,000 meals. I mean, 30,000 meals in 3 weeks in a small city like Batavia is significant when the population is only like 15,000. So that's pretty significant. And we had families thanking us for being open and really appreciative, and said, hey, I'd never been here before. What do I do? And we wanted to make sure that this isn't an embarrassment. This is what we're here for. Like, this is what And they said, well, our cupboards are getting empty. I just got laid off from being a waiter or a waitress, and just feel your heart goes out for them, Howard, and you just do the best you can. And so I worry about what the long-term impact of this is on families and our community. And at the end of the day, I know school will reopen. We'll be ready to get back to work and do some things. But that's kind of my number one concern, I guess, at this point, is what do we look like moving forward? See, here's my little one. So see what happens.
We got a little one running around in the background. She's little. Oh, now she's in focus. Beautiful little girl.
Thank you.
So, Annabelle, we've come up on a half hour. I don't want to keep you any longer. Anything else you want to cover that we didn't get to?
No, I think one thing I say, I spoke to another news agency, and they just said anything. I said, Batavia may be a small city, but we got big heart, and I know that at the end of the day we're going to get through this. And we've had this theme about being better together, and I think if we just stay together, we'll be all right. So.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time, and I thought this was a very fascinating conversation, so I appreciate you going into some depth with us. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you, Howard. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.